How do I know my dharma? What is my dharma? How do I get the clarity that Krishna demands of me on that? Number one, discernment. Number two, bring it. This is called the doctrine of unified action. Unify everything you do. Unify all of your actions around the thin point of the spear, which is your dharma. The doctrine of unified action. Number three, let go of the fruits. This is called relinquishment of the fruits. Let go of the outcome. Guess what? Success or failure is not your problem. Your only concern is, have you identified your calling and are you doing it full out? Let it go. This is guided by greater forces than you, so you don't even know what success and failure really mean. Find your dharma, do it full out, let go of the fruits, and finally, turn the whole thing over to me, says Krishna. In the Bhagavad Gita, action actually lives on the stream of love between the individual and the divine, between the individual mind and the divine consciousness. We might want to reframe that slightly for modern viewers, which is to say, turn this whole thing over to something bigger than yourself. Turn it over to a higher power. Turn it over, if you'd like, to God or to the divine mind. And what Krishna says finally to Arjuna is this: when you follow this path, when you follow these four pillars of karma yoga, something astonishing happens. You become not the doer of your actions. That is to say, now you become a conduit for the actions of a higher power, of a larger consciousness than you possess. He says constantly to Arjuna, you become not the doer, which is a freedom. It's a kind of freedom from the bondage of self. All of the great contemplative traditions are concerned with this idea of the bondage of self, I, me, mine, my actions, my career, my great books. This path, like all of the great paths, has a doorway out of that bondage to self, and this is the doorway that this particular path gives us. We become not the doer. We open ourselves to actions that are motivated by a larger consciousness in which we finally participate. We're going to shift now, as I promised, and look at this question of dharma. We're going to shift now to pillar number one. Krishna says to Arjuna at the beginning of book 2, of chapter 2, he says, Arjuna, look to your dharma to save you. I love that. Look to your dharma to save you. So now we have to take another look at this word dharma. The best definition that I've found of this version of dharma is in René Guénon's wonderful doctrine in Hindu religion. And I'm going to read it to you because it really sums up the essence of this particular view about this word dharma. René Guénon says, and listen carefully to this, he says, dharma is the essential nature of a being, comprising the sum of his particular qualities or characteristics, and determining by virtue of his tendencies or dispositions the manner in which this being will conduct himself, either in a general way or in relation to each particular circumstance. Note the connection again between essential nature and action. His idiosyncratic dispositions and callings and the way he or she acts in the world. Scientists now tell us that every brain is like a fingerprint, utterly unique. And in this view, every dharma is also like a fingerprint, utterly unique. And the whole of this path is about finding our dharma and living it out to the fullest in this lifetime. That's what this life is about in these particular scriptures. Now, to be historically accurate, we have to see that this idea of dharma has been through a transition that we must note in order to be really historically accurate here. Initially, as I said earlier, svadharma, S-V-A, that prefix means your own dharma, referred, of course, to the dharma into which you were born. The dharma, like Arjuna was born into the warrior caste, he had to become a warrior. And there was no changing this whatsoever. You were born into your sacred duty. This whole system was based on the fascinating notion that if you do your individual duty, the duty into which you were born, then all of society is held up. So there's, from the very beginning in this scripture, a really interesting connection between your own particular work in the world and the common good. In this particular system, that was organized by assigning people roles. And of course, this seems very strange to us because we have the idea of separate individual selves. But in this culture, there wasn't so much the sense of an idiosyncratic personal self. The self was actually socially embedded. Now, as most traditional societies do, over time, there emerges this idea of the personal self, the idea of our own individual self with a deep introspective capacity, with a subjective inner world. And so the idea that we're born into our dharma no longer fits for most of us, and certainly in our culture. So the focus became on something slightly different. Rather than svadharma, they began to call it svabhava, which means your own nature, your own idiosyncratic nature. Now, our responsibility is no longer to the caste into which we were born, but rather to our own idiosyncratic gifts, capacities. The idea here is that each one of us is born with highly idiosyncratic gifts, capacities, aptitudes, a special stew of that. And our responsibility is to those gifts. As the great Jungian analyst Carol Pearson says, she talks a lot about the responsibility to the gift in Jungian psychotherapy. There's a brilliant teaching story about this connection between the individual self and the idiosyncratic combination of gifts and the common good. And this goes all the way back to the early Vedic period, which preceded the first century BCE, which preceded the first millennium. I love this story because it really provides a nice visual about this connection. Indra was the greatest god of the Vedic pantheon, sometimes also called Rudra, the great earthquake god, and the lightning bolt god, and the thunderbolt god. And like most of these gods, he lived on top of a mountain. In this case, Indra lived on Mount Meru. And it was said that Indra had cast a vast net over the entire universe. And at the warp and woof strand of each one of these vertices was a gem. Where the warp and woof crossed, there was a gem, and that particular gem was a soul. It was that soul's job to hold together that part of the web. And if you don't hold together your own part of the web, the whole thing starts to disintegrate from your end, which has not been held up. This is a very profound teaching in this tradition. The idea is that the whole is in the part and the part is the whole. We once had a wonderful visiting Swami here who was a teacher, kind of a radical, non-dual teacher. And at one point he made us all stand up and declare, I am the mother of the world. I am the mother of the world. What did that mean? It meant that my actions have mystic power precisely because they are holding together the net, the whole net, my corner of the net, actions with mystic power. The part is in the whole is in the part. Now, again, as we develop the idea of a personal self, our duty no longer to the caste, but rather to our idiosyncratic gifts, what we have inside. There is a particular set of gifts that only you have. that only I have. It's no longer to this prescribed role, but to this inner possibility. Now you can see the shift here, where now personal and social fulfillment both, social fulfillment too, the good of society, depends on your finding and doing your particular dharma. You know, this is a notion that's also found in many other religious traditions, interestingly enough. You can find it in the Christian tradition. Thomas Merton, the great Catholic writer of the 20th century, said, every human being has a vocation to be someone. The problem is there's only one person you can be in the fulfillment of that vocation, and that is yourself. Again, it may sound utterly obvious, but because of the fact of self-deception, our capacity to deceive ourselves about who we actually are, it's not utterly obvious. Emily Dickinson, one of my favorite poets, also from Amherst, said, the self behind the self revealed should startle most. The self behind the self revealed should startle most. You see the wonderful notion that there's a self behind ourself whom we don't know. There's also a wonderful saying that I love to quote from the Gospel of Thomas. The Gospel of Thomas is a non-canonical Christian gospel, which means it's not in the canonical four Gospels. Nonetheless, if you've been listening, you notice it has increasing publicity and power these days. In the Gospel of Thomas occurs this wonderful saying. Thomas says, if you bring forth what is within you will save you. If you bring forth what is within you will save you. Isn't that fantastic? I mean, do you relate to that? I certainly relate to that. The sense of my duty, my calling is to bring forth this precious gift that I know is inside. And then Thomas hits us with the flip side of this. He says, if you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. Ouch. This is the experience of self-betrayal, when you do not bring forth what is within you. And of course, we've all had the experience of self-betrayal, when we're confused, in doubt, not living out our true selves. So let's not condemn self-betrayal. It happens to all of us all the time. But what I always like to say is, don't get comfortable with self-betrayal. So one of the most important things I've learned is self-betrayal happens, but when it is happening, be aware of it. Allow yourself to feel the discomfort that naturally arises when you know from your gut, that's not my highest self. Let yourself be aware of that. Here's another interesting principle that one discovers in the Gita and elsewhere in the conversations about dharma. You cannot escape your own dharma. You can run, but you can't hide. There's a wonderful sense here that, yes, maybe you're chasing your dharma, maybe you're not, but your dharma is chasing you. I love that, and I think it's true.